Hello everyone, and welcome to CRPS Contender, my complex regional pain syndrome education channel. Everything changed when the dendritic cells attacked. Today we will be talking about level 4 in my A&A mini-series, CRPS, a cellular examination. The content in this particular video is quite in-depth, so if this is too complicated for you, maybe go back a video or two and work your way up back to this content because it can be quite confusing. This video is based on a new hypothesis for the pathophysiology of complex regional pain syndrome published in 2018 by Russo, Georgius, and Santarelli. During my time researching for this mini-series, I read many papers, and this is one that I found that really just struck me and resonated. The important thing to note with this paper is that it is a hypothesis. For those who are unfamiliar with that term, that means this is a proposed explanation based on a limited amount of evidence. It still needs more research. It still needs to be rigorously vetted. Now, this team who made this paper and proposed this hypothesis is continuing to study it. They put out another study in 2019 where they are trying to collect the required evidence to determine whether or not their hypothesis is accurate. I would highly encourage other teams to also pick up this thread and run with it. I personally think that it is absolutely worth investigating and holds a lot of merit, and I am very interested to see where it goes. I will be keeping up with this hypothesis and the studies that branch from it. On that note, if any researchers out there are looking for a participant for a CRPS study and you are needing bodies, contact me. I would love to help research this hypothesis. As I said, last slide, this is very complicated content and I am learning as I go. I have not known about this disease for long. Didn't even know what it was 8 months ago at all. So this is definitely still a learning curve for me. I am doing my best. I might make a mistake. If so, I'm sorry. I'm doing my best. But this is heavy content here. If the authors of this study ever see this video and would like to contact me, even if that's just to tell me that I made a mistake, I would love to hear from you. I love your work so much, and I am very intrigued by it. With that out of the way, let's move on. The 2018 hypothesis presents that there are 4 major problems that occur in CRPS. First, there is local tissue damage and sustained inflammation. Second, there is pathological pain processing in the central nervous system. This occurs in 3 major areas: dorsal root ganglia, which is the posterior partner as your peripheral nervous system nerves enter your central nervous system at the spinal cord. This also occurs in your cortex, which is your higher processing center that consists of your temporal, frontal, occipital, and parietal lobes. This is made up of gray matter. And third, your subcortex. This consists of your limbic system structures, your basal ganglia, your amygdala, your hippocampus, your thalamus, your hypothalamus, your cingulate gyrus. Your subcortex is made up of white matter, which means it is basically made up of the massive sections of nerve bundles where they terminate in the brain. Third, there is autonomic dysfunction. This includes endocrine dysfunction, which controls your hormone levels, a hyperactive sympathetic nervous system, and a hypoactive parasympathetic nervous system. And fourth, immune dysfunction. This includes both your innate immune system and your adaptive immune system. The 2018 hypothesis proposes that dendritic cell activation and migration is at the root of all 4 of these major issues. These 4 major components interact with and build upon each other, creating a feedback loop and perpetuating the chronic condition of CRPS. Each of these 4 large components control many smaller components, causing cascading dysfunction and protean symptom presentation. Now, protean means the ability to change easily or frequently, versatility, multifaceted behavior, and the ability to be adaptable. Let's start with major problem number 1. Tissue trauma. Tissue trauma can occur from an injury, from tissue hypoxia, which is the under-oxygenation of tissue cells, autoimmunity, which is where your immune system recognizes yourself as a pathogen and causes self-cell death, limb immobilization leading to muscle wasting, this can be from pain or malfunction, and hyperactive sympathetic nervous system causing a chronic stress response. Two things happen when tissue trauma occurs. Firstly, DAMPs are released. DAMPs are damage-associated molecular products. These are very, very tiny products that basically work like sirens and encourage dendritic cells to come over and check things out and see if there's a problem going on. We will come back to this one later. The second thing that happens is that your nociceptors are activated. Nociceptors are pain and threat receptors in your peripheral nervous system. These activate two particular pathways. Your A delta fibers are responsible for your quick, first, shallow pain, and your C fibers, which are responsible for your second, slower, deeper, spreading pain. This is where the burning pain in CRPS comes from. After your nociceptors in your peripheral nervous system are activated, your peripheral nervous system sends pain signals up to your spinal cord. Before those signals reach your central nervous system and your spinal cord, they have to go through your dorsal root ganglia, which is where your peripheral nervous system meets up with your central nervous system. Cells in your dorsal root ganglia and spinal cord end up becoming inflamed, oversensitized, and dysfunctional. There are three major types of cells that this happens to. First, your nociceptive neurons. These are the receptors that receive the pain signals from your peripheral nervous system. Your microglia, these are the innate immune cells in your nervous system, and astrocytes. Astrocytes are responsible for neuron maintenance and support. When these cells in your dorsal root ganglia are dysfunctional, several full body symptoms occur. Regional neuropathic pain, this is the burning pain. Allodynia, that is having a pain response to a non-painful stimulus. Hyperalgesia, this is having a severe pain response to a slight pain stimulus. Urinary tract dysfunction, digestive tract dysfunction, cardiac dysfunction, and respiratory dysfunction. The next thing that happens after your spinal cord receives the signals from your peripheral nervous system is that those signals are then sent up the spinal cord to the brain. Before the brain can receive these signals, your signals have to cross the blood-brain barrier to relay that pain sensation and the inflammatory conditions of the body to the brain. The blood-brain barrier is there to protect the brain from pathogens or other systemic issues that would threaten the body. This keeps your brain healthy, functional, and safe, and allows it to focus on running the body without having to be concerned about being attacked. Normally, most things cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. However, in inflammatory conditions, the blood-brain barrier becomes selectively permeable and allows dendritic cells to cross into the brain. Dendritic cells then find microglia and astrocytes in the brain and inflame them, causing brain swelling. This is very bad. Neuroinflammation kills brain cells, causing neural atrophy and rapid aging. Neuroinflammation also slows communication between neurons, causes brain fog, slow thinking, fatigue, depression, anxiety, a chronic stress response, reduced neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to adjust and change and connect to itself, and it also contributes to progressive neurodegenerative diseases. After the pain sensation is received in your higher functioning pain processing centers in the cortex, there is a neuronal dysfunction that happens. And this is attributed to your microglial and astrocyte activation. This dysfunction causes pathological pain, which is unending pain experience with little hope for therapeutic relief because it is not occurring at the area of injury, but instead occurring in brain matter. Your basal ganglia is responsible for your autonomic, endocrine, and motor functions. However, any actions taken or messages sent out by your basal ganglia must be congruent and aligned with the information that it has received from your pain processing centers. So if your pain processing center is sending bad information, the basal ganglia must work with what it is sent. While brain cells are being destroyed by the neuroinflammation, your basal ganglia dysfunction cascades into full body symptoms which have secondary full body cascades of their own. The primary cascade includes things like hypothalamic pituitary axis stimulation. This is the control center for your endocrine system, which regulates your thyroid, adrenal, and gonadal glands. This also causes dopamine dysfunction, which inhibits executive function, motor control, motivation, arousal, reinforcement, reward, sexual gratification. This also contributes to nausea. Dystonia. These are uncontrollable muscle contractions that are involuntary. Limbic system deterioration. Your basal ganglia is a major component of your limbic system, and because they work together in a network, when you change one, you end up affecting all of them. Sympathetic nervous system hyperarousal. These are your fight or flight responses, your mobilization responses that get you ready to protect yourself from a threat. Let's discuss your sympathetic nervous system hyperarousal. When your sympathetic nervous system is overactive, you are over-releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine. You might also hear these called adrenaline or noradrenaline. This contributes to mobilization responses when none are needed or necessary. The other thing an overactive sympathetic nervous system does is suppresses its partner, the parasympathetic nervous system. Your parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for your rest and digest responses. These are your maintenance responses. This also causes your vagus nerve to malfunction because it inhibits your inflammatory reflex path. This is the pathway that reduces inflammation and keeps your body in a tolerant immune state, which is an inactive immune response. This also creates a chronic stress response. As your body loses immune tolerance, it moves into an activated immune response. Let's talk with a little more specificity about what is actually happening when your SNS is overactive. Let's talk about catecholamines. When your SNS is overactive, your catecholamine count is increased. Catecholamines are neurotransmitters and hormones that are made by your adrenal glands, which are the glands that are located on top of your kidneys. The catecholamines made here include dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, which are released when you are physically or emotionally stressed. Chronic stress can cause or exacerbate mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and personality disorders, cardiovascular disease, including heart disease, heart attacks, chronic high blood pressure or stroke, obesity or eating disorders, including anorexia, and I will come back to that one, sexual dysfunction, which can include a loss of sexual desire, impotence, premature ejaculation, or menstrual issues, skin and hair issues like psoriasis, eczema, acne, or hair loss, and GI dysfunction, including things like GERD, gastritis, ulcerative colitis, and irritable bowel syndrome. When your SNS is overactive, you can experience things like an increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, an increased breathing rate, increased or altered sweat gland activation, increased or altered body temperature, increased muscle contraction frequency, and suppressed parasympathetic nervous system activity. Your parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for creating acetylcholines. When your parasympathetic nervous system is suppressed, you have a reduced acetylcholine count. Acetylcholines are neurotransmitters and neuromodulators that are produced in certain neurons. These are things that send messages from your nervous system to the body. Acetylcholines cause somatic muscle contractions. These are the muscles you actively control, like your biceps or your hamstrings. They increase vasodilation, decreases heart rate, and cardiac contraction. So if you are having a reduced acetylcholine count, this means your blood vessels are constricted, your heart is pumping fast and hard. Your acetylcholine is responsible for increasing your gastric acid, your peristalsis and digestive contractive, and decreasing your bladder capacity. So if you are having a reduced acetylcholine count, this means you have reduced gastric acid, which can cause problems digesting food in your stomach. You are having reduced peristalsis and digestive contractions, which means your food is not being properly digested or moved through your large or small intestines. Acetylcholine also increases your bronchial dilation. So if you have reduced acetylcholine, this means that you might not be experiencing a full, deep breathing or full lung expansion. Acetylcholine also stimulates parasympathetically controlled glandular secretions. Acetylcholine is also very important for the mechanisms of memory and learning in your central nervous system. Disruption or inhibition of acetylcholine activity negatively affects short and long-term memory, consolidation, and retrieval. Your parasympathetic nervous system is also closely entwined with your vagus nerve function. Your vagus nerve accounts for 75% of the activity that your parasympathetic nervous system controls. The vagus nerve is the longest, most complex of the 12 cranial nerves in your body and provides parasympathetic nervous system motor fibers to every organ except your adrenal glands. When you have a hypoactive parasympathetic nervous system, this means you are also experiencing a hypoactive vagus nerve, which includes a hypoactive, reflexive, cholinergic, anti-inflammatory pathway. This pathway runs from your vagus nerve to your spleen and lymph nodes, inhibits pro-inflammatory cytokine release, stimulates acetylcholine-producing T cells and norepinephrine release, which suppresses microglial and astrocytic activation and inhibits production of inflammatory mediators, including cytokines. In short, this pathway is responsible for telling your nervous system to cool it and stand down. When this pathway is not working, you end up losing your immune tolerance. The other thing you end up losing is your self-tolerance, the ability of your immune system to recognize your own cells. When your brain sends out the inflammatory conditions alert to the rest of your body, it starts the immune response to the self. When your cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway is suppressed via sympathetic nervous system overactivity, this shifts your immune system from a standby tolerant position to an active intolerance status. Your vagus nerve, due to being dysfunctional, does not tell your immune system to stand down, which allows the immune system to perpetuate its attack against the self. The innate immune system calls defenses to action and releases cytokine cascades to recruit more cells and boost numbers. This activates autoimmunity. Your immune system is activated in two ways: through sympathetic nervous system overactivity and vagus nerve dysfunction, and through dendritic cells activated by those DAMPs we talked about in the tissue trauma slide. Remember, DAMPs are your damage-associated molecular products. When your dendritic cells are activated by the DAMPs, caused by tissue trauma, they migrate from the area of injury to the lymph nodes. The cells in your lymph nodes recognize self cells as pathogens and start an adaptive immune response against them. Your adaptive immune response does two things. It releases an inflammatory cytokine cascade to immediately assist your innate immune response. This increases three things. It produces more dendritic cells to perpetuate the cycle. It produces monocytes, which eat dead, damaged cells and foreign bodies, and it increases osteoclasts, which eat bone cells. The other thing it does is it increases your adaptive immune cells and sends them out to the injured area to obliterate pathogens. Now remember, the pathogens in question are your own cells that have been incorrectly labeled by your body. The cells increased are your T cells, which direct and destroy, your B cells, which produce antibodies, your natural killer cells, which puncture and kill infected cells, and lymphatic residing dendritic cells. Let's discuss what an inflammatory cytokine cascade is in a bit more detail. Cytokines are proteins that are produced by a broad range of nucleated cells. Cytokines are peptides, which are short chains of amino acids, which cannot cross the lipid bilayer cell wall into the cytoplasm of the cell. Cytokines function as intercellular messenger molecules to provoke specific biological reactions after binding to specific cell receptors on the outside of the cell wall. They are responsible for regulating the inflammation response, and they interact with immune cells to deal with threats. Interleukins are a specific kind of cytokine that are created by leukocytes, which are white blood cells, and send messages to other leukocytes. Cytokines and hormones, while both used to send messages and provoke specific reactions, are different products and they are not interchangeable. Several inflammatory cytokines are activated by oxidative stress, which means you have too many free radicals in your system. Free radicals, which are byproducts of ATP production, damage cells, proteins, and DNA. Oxidative stress also causes chronic inflammation. Your brain is particularly vulnerable to oxidative stress due to the amount of oxygen the brain requires to properly function, and this may also contribute to neurodegenerative conditions. What are the cytokines and where are they produced? Now, there are lots and lots of different kinds of cytokines, but there are a few that are really prominent in CRPS. Interleukin 1. Now remember, interleukins are cytokines that are created by leukocytes to interact with other leukocytes. Interleukin 1 increases your body temperature as well as increasing your innate immune and lymphatic responses. Interleukin 2 increases your T cell production, your leukocyte production, cell necrosis, and creates skin itchiness. Interleukin 6 increase osteoclasts, those are the cells that eat bones, B cells, neutrophils. It also decreases your regulatory T cells. Now remember, your regulatory T cells are the cells that help differentiate you from other. So if you have a decreased number of regulatory T cells, you're going to have a problem identifying your own cells. Interleukin 6 can also cross the blood-brain barrier. Interleukin 18 increases the natural killer cells active in the body and increases helper T cells. TNF-A, which is tumor necrosis factor alpha, increases cell necrosis as well as increasing interleukin 1 and 6. Interleukin 1 is produced by activated macrophages, neutrophils, epithelial cells, and endothelial cells. Interleukin 2 is produced by T cells, natural killer cells, and dendritic cells. Interleukin 6 is produced by T cells, B cells, monocytes, fibroblasts, keratinocytes, endothelial cells, mesangial cells, and osteoblasts. Interleukin 18 is produced by macrophages, monocytes, T cells, B cells, dendritic cells, epithelial cells, and keratinocytes. And TNF-A is produced by macrophages, monocytes, endothelial cells, neutrophils, smooth muscle cells, activated lymphocytes, astrocytes, and adipocytes. Your immune responses, when turned against yourself, create secondary tissue damage. Your innate immune system, I want you to imagine as your average army grunt. Your innate immune system has legions of cells that are easily replaced and die frequently. They deal with pathogens via sheer numbers. Picture a medieval battle where you're only able to fight your opponents with close combat weapons. On the other hand, your adaptive immune response is more like modern warfare. I want you to picture your adaptive immune cells like drone operators. They are fewer cells, they are hard to replace, they are highly specialized, and they deal with pathogens via long-range ballistic missiles. Your adaptive immune response creates a lot of collateral damage as it kills healthy cells while destroying pathogens. But when your immune system recognizes yourself as a pathogen, things can become very damaging very quickly. In CRPS, your immune system recognizes your nervous system as a pathogen and attacks it, destroying neuronal structures and focusing specifically on autonomic neurons. Several adrenaline and acetylcholine receptors are labeled as antigens, which are foreign bodies that need to be destroyed, by your B-cell antibodies. At this point, you have autoantigens, self cells that are labeled as dangerous, and autoantibodies, antibodies that are directed against yourself. These autoantibodies bind to your receptors, marking them for destruction. These receptors regulate many things, including your heart rate, blood pressure, vasoconstriction, peristalsis, dystrophy, sweat glands, olfactory sensitivity, and anorexia. Now, this is not the same thing as anorexia nervosa. This just means a loss of appetite or an aversion to food. This immune system response perpetuates itself, continuing the cycle. The secondary tissue damage caused by the immune response, releases a cytokine cascade, and activates the dendritic cells. And here we are back again at the beginning of the cycle. This causes several area-specific responses, including osteonecrosis, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, dystrophy, atrophy. These symptoms can also cause limb immobilization, which again perpetuates the cycle. Finally, we end up with endothelial dysfunction. Tissue damage causes inflammatory cytokine cascades, which causes localized blood vessel remodeling and vascular permeability. This permeability allows leukocyte numbers to increase with ease and cross into the tissues. This leads to irregular vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Vascular dysfunction can cause several localized responses, including temperature irregularities, discoloration, and tissue hypoxia. Tissue hypoxia causes tissue damage, causing dendritic cell activation and perpetuating the cycle. We have covered a ton of content in this video, and I know it can be very confusing because it is so cyclical and building upon itself. So here's a slide from earlier in the video to conclude what we have covered today. The 4 major areas of dysfunction are local tissue damage with sustained inflammation, pathological pain processing in your central nervous system, including your dorsal root ganglia, your cortex and your subcortex, autonomic dysfunction, including endocrine, sympathetic, and parasympathetic dysfunction, and immune dysfunction, which includes your innate and adaptive immune systems. Thanks so much for watching. If you like the content I am creating on this channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you would like to contribute to my medical expenses fund, my Patreon is CRPS Contender. Some of the relevant sources, not all of them, I used a lot, but some will be linked below in the description. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome to